Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The October evening was wrapping the Potters, home in Godric's Hollow, in a soft golden glow. Outside, leaves rustled in the wind, composing the faint, whispering melody of autumn. Inside, a cozy stillness reigned. The children were settling down for the night, their muffled voices drifting from the upper floor. In the kitchen, the fireplace quietly hissed and spat, filling the space with comforting warmth and calm. Harry Potter stood by the window, gazing out at the darkening sky. He was 34, but sometimes it felt as though far more time had passed since the day he last dueled Voldemort. The scar on his forehead had long ceased to ache, yet the memories remained, not oppressive but rather nostalgic, like old photographs in a family album. Behind him, Ginny was setting the table for a late supper. She was 33, and still possessed the same fiery energy as she had in her youth, when she played for the Holyhead Harpies. Now she worked as a sports correspondent for the Daily Prophet, but she still loved to fly her broomstick in her free time, though mostly now with the children. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ginny asked, placing 2 mugs of hot tea, brewed with cinnamon and honey, on the table. Harry turned, smiled, and walked over. "Just thinking about how fast time flies," he said, sitting down across from her. "It seems like only yesterday we got married, and now we have 3 children, and James is already 10. Ginny nodded, cupping her hands around the warm mug. A reflective glint appeared in her eyes. "He'll be off to Hogwarts next summer," she said softly. "This will be his last Halloween at home, with all 3 of them together, still small and carefree." Harry felt a slight familiar pull in his chest, not sadness, but rather a profound awareness of the moment's fleeting nature. He knew Ginny was right. Next year, James Sirius would board the Hogwarts Express, followed a year later by Albus Severus, and then finally, little Lily Luna. And while Harry was thrilled for his children to have the same adventures he once had, a part of his soul already mourned the days when they were all near, small, and safely guarded. "Do you remember how we used to celebrate Halloween at the Burrow?" Ginny asked, smiling. "When I was little, Mum always threw a massive party. She baked pumpkin pasties, Dad charmed the garden gnomes to glow in the dark, and my brothers held a contest for the scariest mask." Harry listened, imagining Ginny as a child, a freckled red-headed girl running through the burrow with her brothers. "Fred and George always won," Ginny continued, a touch of warm nostalgia in her voice at the mention of Fred. "They charmed their masks, so they moved and made noises. One year, Fred scared Percy so badly, he hit Mum's favorite plant pot with his wand." They both laughed, envisioning a young, panicking Percy. "And I remember my first Halloween at Hogwarts," Harry mused. "The Great Hall was adorned with floating candles, massive pumpkins, and charmed bats swooped everywhere. It was unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like it." He paused, recalling that night, the troll in the dungeons, and how he and Ron had saved Hermione. That was when their true, unbreakable friendship began. "It was that night Ron and I saved Hermione from the troll," he added. "We became inseparable from that moment on." Ginny placed her hand on his. "That's why Halloween has always been special for you, hasn't it?" Harry nodded. "It has. Though there are difficult memories associated with the date, there is also something inherently magical about the holiday itself. A sense of wonder, of mystery, of the extraordinary." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their tea and watching the fire in the hearth. Golden and red flames danced, casting whimsical shadows on the walls. Somewhere upstairs, a faint creak sounded. One of the children perhaps turning over in their sleep. "You know what I think," Ginny suddenly said, and that characteristic glint that Harry knew so well shone in her eyes. It meant an idea had struck her. "We have to throw our children the most incredible, the most magical Halloween they have ever seen." Harry raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Something spectacular, Ginny burst out, her face alight with enthusiasm. Something they will remember forever. After all, this is the last time we'll all be together before James goes to Hogwarts. Let's create a truly enchanted celebration for them. One that combines the best of your Hogwarts memories and my memories of the family celebrations at the Burrow. Harry felt a sudden warmth ignite in his chest. Ginny's idea was brilliant. That sounds wonderful, he said. But what exactly are you proposing? I don't know yet, Ginny confessed. But if we involve Ron and Hermione, with their children, we'll certainly come up with something. Rose and Hugo will be thrilled, and it will be much more fun for our three with their cousins. Harry smiled. Of course, Ron and Hermione. Could anything important ever be arranged without them? Let's call them right now, he suggested. Ginny jumped up from her chair. Excellent thought. I'll grab the two-way mirror. She quickly went upstairs and returned a few moments later with a small silver mirror that Harry had once given her for her birthday. Magical two-way mirrors were much more convenient than Muggle telephones, though Hermione sometimes insisted on using Muggle technology, purely on principle. Ginny touched the mirror's surface with her wand and whispered, "Hermione Granger Weasley." The mirror clouded over for a moment, and then Hermione's face appeared. She was 35, her brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, and reading spectacles perched on her nose. She was clearly working on some documents. "Ginny!" "Harry!" She greeted them with a smile. "What's the matter?" "Listen," Harry began, feeling his enthusiasm build. "Ginny and I were just sitting here thinking about Halloween. Next year, James goes to Hogwarts, and this will be the last time all our kids are home together for the holiday." "Oh, I see," Hermione nodded, comprehension dawning in her eyes. "Rose goes in 3 years too. Time flies so quickly." "That's why we want to arrange something special," Ginny continued. "The most incredible Halloween celebration for all our children. Something they will never forget." Ron immediately brightened. "That's a fantastic idea. The kids will love it." "What exactly are you planning?" "Nothing specific yet," Harry admitted. "That's why we called. Maybe you could come over tonight, after the children are asleep. We can discuss it all together." "Sounds perfect," Hermione agreed. "We'll be there in about an hour. Rose and Hugo are already in bed. We'll ask Ron's mum to sit with them." "Perfect." Ginny smiled. "See you then." The mirror clouded, and the connection broke. Harry looked at Ginny, and they both smiled, the way they used to smile before a new adventure began. Perhaps this time, there were no dark wizards or dangerous missions, but the anticipation of something special hung in the air. An hour later, there was a light knock on the Potter's door. Harry opened it to see Ron and Hermione, dressed in warm autumn cloaks. They stepped inside, bringing with them the chilly air and the scent of fallen leaves. "Wow, it's so cozy in here," Ron said, taking off his cloak and hanging it on a hook by the door. "Your house is always so warm." "It's the magic of the hearth," Ginny quipped, hugging Hermione. "Come on into the kitchen, I've put the kettle on." They walked into the comfortable kitchen, where mugs, a kettle of hot water, a plate of freshly baked biscuits, and a small bottle of fire whiskey, just in case someone wanted a splash in their tea, were already on the table. Ron immediately reached for a biscuit, which drew a small smile from Hermione. "Ron, we just had dinner," she remarked. "That doesn't stop me from having a snack," Ron replied with a mouthful, and everyone laughed. They sat down at the table, Harry and Ginny on one side, Ron and Hermione on the other. A pleasant silence settled for a few minutes while they poured themselves tea. Hermione pulled a small notebook and a quill pen from her bag. Of course, she couldn't come to a meeting without her note-taking supplies. "Right," she began, opening the notebook to a clean page. "Tell us more about your idea." Ginny leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "We want to create the most incredible Halloween for the children. Something that combines the magic of Hogwarts with the warmth of a family holiday. Something unforgettable." "I was remembering my first Halloween at Hogwarts," Harry added. "The Great Hall, the floating candles, the enchanted pumpkins, and the incredible atmosphere. We'd love for our children to experience something similar, even though they aren't at school yet. Ron swallowed another biscuit and nodded. That sounds fantastic. Maybe we could arrange a gigantic Quidditch match. With a Halloween theme, brooms decorated with pumpkins, golden snitches in the shape of ghosts. Ginny laughed. Ron, you always think of Quidditch. But, that's actually not a bad idea. The kids love to fly, especially James. It could be part of the celebration. A part, Hermione emphasized, making notes. But we can't limit ourselves to just sports. There has to be more. Perhaps an educational program, the history of Halloween in the wizarding world, ancient traditions, legends? Ron sighed. Hermione, it's supposed to be fun, not a history of magic lesson. I can make it interesting, Hermione protested, slightly offended. Children love stories, if they're presented properly. Imagine magical illusions showing ancient Halloween legends, interactive quests where the children become part of the story. Harry pondered this. Hermione was right. If the educational part was presented as an adventure, the children would certainly be captivated. That's actually quite good, he said. We can combine the entertaining and the cognitive. Ginny leaned in even closer to the table, her hands gesturing as she spoke. And I want to create a magical labyrinth. Not scary, but thrilling. With magical creatures, puzzles, unexpected twists. Something that makes the children feel like real wizard explorers. A labyrinth is brilliant, Harry agreed, especially if we keep it safe but intriguing. Ron reached for the fire whiskey bottle and poured a small amount into his tea. So, we have Quidditch, stories, a labyrinth. He counted on his fingers. What else? Atmosphere, Harry said decisively. The most important thing is the atmosphere. I want the children to feel the same magic I felt at Hogwarts. Floating candles, enchanted pumpkins, a magical sky. Hermione wrote rapidly, her pen barely keeping up with her thoughts. All right, we need a large location, something like a meadow or a field where we can fit all this. Ginny suddenly slapped the table with her palm. The field by the Burrow. Do you remember that big field behind the garden where we used to play Quidditch? There's enough space there, and it's far from Muggle houses. We can put up protective charms so no one bothers us. Ron smiled broadly. Perfect. Mum and Dad certainly won't mind. They adore their grandchildren and will be happy to help. Hermione lifted her quill. So, the location is decided. Now we need to plan everything. What exact attractions? What menu? Who is responsible for what? They spent the next 2 hours discussing the details. Ron occasionally distracted himself with biscuits, drawing ironic remarks from Hermione, but he only smiled and kept eating. Hermione drew diagrams and made detailed lists, her handwriting growing smaller as the ideas multiplied. Ginny and Harry interrupted each other, adding new suggestions and chuckling at each other's enthusiasm. Right, Hermione finally said, setting down her quill and surveying her notes. Let's summarize. We are creating a magical Halloween festival on the field by the Burrow. We will have, she began to list the points. First, atmospheric decorations in the style of Hogwarts. Floating candles, enchanted pumpkins, magical lights, charmed ghosts and bats. Harry, are you in charge of this? Harry nodded. Yes, I can ask a few auras to help with the charms. Maybe Neville will join in too. Second, a Quidditch zone with safe children's broomsticks and games. Ginny, is this your domain? Absolutely, Ginny smiled. I'll ask a few of my former teammates to help. Third, a magical labyrinth with creatures, puzzles and adventures. Ron and Ginny, can you work on this together? No problem, Ron said. George can give us a few magical gadgets from his shop. Fourth, the educational and entertainment program with Halloween stories. Hermione continued. I will handle this. I'll prepare interactive stories with magical illusions. Fifth, the menu, Ginny said. Pumpkin pasties, sweets, hot butterbeer for the children. Can we ask your mum, Ron, to help with the cooking? She'll be thrilled, Ron assured them. Mum loves cooking for the grandchildren. Hermione finished writing a few more points on her list, then looked at everyone. So we have 3 weeks until Halloween. That's enough time, if we start right now. Harry felt a surge of excitement rising in his chest, the same excitement he used to feel before a new adventure at Hogwarts. Of course, this time it was a different adventure. Not a battle against the dark arts, but the creation of a holiday for their children. But that didn't make it any less important. "I can already imagine how the children will react when they see all this," he said quietly. "Their faces when they first see the floating candles." Ginny placed her hand on his shoulder. "It will be incredible," she whispered. Ron raised his mug of tea. "To the best Halloween of our children's lives." They all raised their mugs and clinked them together, laughing. In that moment, Harry felt once again what he had felt so many years ago. A sense of unity with his best friends, a feeling that together they could truly do something magical. "So, where do we start?" Ron asked, setting his mug down. Hermione turned a page in her notebook. "Let's divide the tasks for the coming week. Harry, you deal with the decorations. You need to find out where to buy the floating candles, magical pumpkins, and everything else. Ginny, you start planning the Quidditch zone. What games, how many brooms we need. Ron, you go to George for the magical contraptions for the labyrinth. And I will research the history of Halloween and prepare the program." "Sounds like a plan," Harry agreed. "And the field needs to be prepared," Ginny added. "Maybe next weekend we can go to the Burrow and check out the spot, figure out where to put everything." "A great idea," Hermione said. "We'll take the children with us, let them run around for a bit. They won't suspect what we're actually planning." Ron chuckled. "James and Rose are too smart. They'll definitely suspect something." "Then we'll just say we're going to Grandma and Grandpa's for a family lunch," Ginny suggested. "While the children are playing, we'll survey the area." They spent another hour discussing the details, what the budget was, who would pay for what materials were needed, and who else could be enlisted for help. Hermione made a detailed shopping list, Ginny sketched a schematic plan of the field, Harry discussed the technical aspects of the magical charms with Ron, and Ron occasionally interjected humorous comments that lightened the atmosphere. When the clock on the wall struck 1 in the morning, Hermione sighed and closed her notebook. "All right, we should go. The children wake up early, and I have work the day after tomorrow. I have tomorrow off, so I can start preparing." They stood up from the table. Harry felt a pleasant fatigue, the kind that comes after productive work and warm conversation with friends. "Thanks for coming," he said, hugging Hermione first, then Ron. "Together we'll definitely make something incredible." "Always together, mate," Ron smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just like 20 years ago." Ginny hugged Hermione. "We'll connect tomorrow and discuss the first steps. Maybe we'll go to the Burrow to check out the field on Saturday." "Brilliant idea," Hermione agreed. "We'll take the kids, say we're just going for a family lunch at Molly and Arthur's." "Perfect," Ginny smiled. When Ron and Hermione had gathered their things and stepped out the door, Harry and Ginny stood on the porch, watching their friends disappear into the darkness of the night with a quiet pop of apparition. The air cracked softly, and they were gone. Harry closed the door and turned to Ginny. She was looking at him with a smile. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think we're going to create something truly special," he replied, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Our children will remember this Halloween for the rest of their lives." They walked upstairs together, peeking into the children's rooms. James was asleep, arms flung wide, Albus tightly clutching his favorite toy, and little Lily was smiling in her sleep. Harry felt his heart fill with warmth and love. These were his children, his family, his world. And he would do everything to give them the best Halloween of their lives. When they lay down to sleep, Harry couldn't drift off for a long time. He lay in the darkness, imagining James, Albus, and Lily's faces when they saw the floating candles. He imagined their laughter as they flew their broomsticks through the magical labyrinth. He imagined them sitting at the feast table, surrounded by magic and love, and how those memories would stay with them forever. Ginny breathed softly next to him, already asleep, but her hand rested on his chest, warm, dependable, alive. Harry covered her hand with his own and smiled into the darkness. Yes, he thought, this will be the best Halloween. Not because it will be the most expensive or the most spectacular, but because it will be filled with love, created by parents for their children, and imbued with that true magic that has nothing to do with spells, the magic of family, friendship, and happiness. Saturday dawned bright and cool. The October sun broke through the light clouds, illuminating the world in a soft golden glow. Harry woke up to sounds drifting from the kitchen. He sat up slowly in bed, stretched, and looked at the clock. It was already 9 in the morning. Ginny, it seemed, was already up. He went downstairs and saw that the whole family was already gathered for breakfast. Ginny stood by the stove, flipping pancakes, and the 3 children sat at the table, crackling with energy, as they always were in the morning. "Dad!" James shouted, waving at him, his red hair stuck up everywhere, reminding Harry of his own unruly mop. "Mum says we're going to Grandma Molly's today!" Harry walked over and kissed Ginny on the cheek. "Good morning. Everything ready for the trip?" "Yes," Ginny whispered, flipping the last pancake. "I called Hermione this morning. They're coming too. Molly and Arthur are thrilled about the idea and are waiting for us." Harry sat down at the table next to Albus, who was diligently spreading jam on a piece of toast. "Grandma bakes the best pies," the boy said seriously. He resembled Harry more than the others, the same dark hair, the same green eyes. "That's true," Harry agreed, smiling. Little Lily, sitting in her high chair, clapped her hands joyfully. "Rose, Hugo," she exclaimed. She adored her cousins and was always happy to see them. Ginny brought the plate of pancakes to the table. "Eat quickly, children, we're leaving in an hour." Breakfast was a cheerful affair. James talked about his new broomstick flying technique that he'd invented himself. Albus shared the story of a magical toad he and James had found in the garden yesterday. Lily mostly listened, occasionally interjecting single words. Harry watched them, feeling a deep gratitude for these simple moments. It was mornings like this, he thought, that made life truly magical. After breakfast, everyone quickly got ready. Ginny helped Lily into a warm jacket. Harry made sure James and Albus had their scarves. October was chilly this year. When everyone was prepared, they stepped out into the garden. "James, Albus, hold hands," Harry said. "We're apparating together." Ginny took Lily into her arms, and in an instant, they all vanished with a quiet pop, leaving the empty garden behind. The Burrow greeted them, with familiar warmth and comfort. It was a marvelous house, several floors that seemed built without any logic, supported more by magic than by physical laws, but that was precisely its charm. Molly Weasley was already standing by the door, her face radiant with joy. She was 65, but still full of energy. "My darlings," she cried, hugging the children first, then Harry and Ginny. Come in, Arthur is in the garden, tinkering with some muggle contraptions." The children immediately ran inside, searching for the interesting objects that were always scattered around the burrow. Harry and Ginny followed them in. "Have Ron and Hermione arrived yet?" Ginny asked. "They'll be here any minute," Molly replied, walking toward the kitchen. "I've made tea and biscuits. Sit down, rest." Just then, the familiar sound of apparition rang out, and Ron, Hermione, Rose, and Hugo appeared in the yard. The children immediately ran toward each other, shouting happily. Ron came into the house, smiling. "Something smells incredible," he said, sniffing the air. "Mum, did you bake apple pie?" "Of course," Molly replied, patting him on the shoulder. "You're my son. I know what you like." Hermione followed him in, holding her familiar notebook. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted them. "I've drawn up a more detailed plan based on yesterday's discussion." "Hermione, we just arrived," Harry laughed. "Maybe we should have some tea first." She looked slightly flustered but smiled. All right, but then we must survey the field." They all gathered in the kitchen. Harry, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, Molly, and soon joined by Arthur, who came in from the garden, still holding some muggle tool. "Harry, Ron," he greeted them happily. "A wonderful day, isn't it?" "Dad, we want to talk to you about something," Ginny began when everyone was seated at the table. Molly and Arthur looked at them attentively. "We're planning to arrange a big Halloween celebration for the children," Harry explained. "In the field behind your garden, if you don't mind. Something grand, magical decorations, games, a labyrinth." Molly's face lit up. "Oh, what a marvelous idea. Of course you can use the field. It's big, and no one will disturb you there." Arthur nodded. I can help with the charms. I have experience with protective enchantments. Thank you, Ginny said sincerely. That means a lot to us. Ron sipped his tea. Maybe we should go check out the field now, while the children are playing. Everyone agreed. Molly went to supervise the children, who were already exploring the Burrow's attic, and the rest walked out into the garden and headed toward the field. The field was indeed large, at least 100 yards wide, surrounded by trees that had begun to shed their gold and red leaves. The air was fresh and cool, smelling of autumn and earth. The sky was clear and blue, and the sun illuminated the space softly. Perfect, Ginny whispered, looking around. There's enough space for everything. Hermione pulled out her notebook and began walking across the field, measuring distances with her steps. All right, if we put the main decoration zone here, she pointed to the center of the field, then the Quidditch zone can be on the left side, and the labyrinth on the right. Harry walked up to her, imagining how everything would look. And a magical sky over the whole field. Floating candles at different heights to create the illusion of the Great Hall. Ron circled the area, checking for obstacles. There are a few large stones here. We can use them as part of the labyrinth or a resting area. Arthur pulled out his wand and began casting test protective charms, checking how stable the magic would be in this area. The magical field here is strong, he said with satisfaction. The charms will hold well. Ginny walked to the edge of the field where the tall trees grew. We can enchant the trees so they glow with a soft light. It will create an extra atmosphere. They spent about an hour discussing every detail, where to put the food table, where to make the entrance to the labyrinth, and how to organize a safe Quidditch zone for the younger children. Hermione wrote everything down, drawing diagrams and marking distances. So, she finally said, closing her notebook, we have a clear plan for the location. Now we need to start gathering materials. Harry looked at Ron. Are you going to George's tomorrow? Yes. Ron nodded. He said he has new Halloween stuff. I think some of it will be perfect for the labyrinth. And I'm going to Diagon Alley the day after tomorrow, Harry added. I need to find a supplier of magical decorations. Ginny smiled. I'll talk to my former teammates. They can lend us children's broomsticks and help organize the games. Hermione nodded. And I'm heading to the Ministry Library. They have a section on the history of magical holidays. I need to research Halloween traditions. They stood for a few more minutes, just looking at the field, imagining how it would transform in 3 weeks. Harry felt a wave of anticipation rise in his chest. Not anxiety, but joyful excitement. It's going to be incredible, he said softly. Yes, Ginny agreed, taking his hand. Our children will remember this forever. They returned to the Burrow, where the children were still playing, unaware of the adults' grand plans. Molly had set the table for lunch, and everyone gathered together. A loud, cheerful family, filled with love and laughter. Harry sat at the table, looking at the faces of his children, at Ron and Hermione, at Molly and Arthur, at Ginny, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was his family, extended, populous, sometimes chaotic, but always loving. And for them, he would create the best Halloween imaginable. Not for fame or recognition, but simply because they deserved happiness, magic, and memories that would warm their hearts for a lifetime. When lunch was over and the children ran off to play again, the 4 friends remained at the table, finishing their tea. Hermione opened her notebook and began dividing the tasks into weeks. First week, gathering materials and decorations, she said. Second week, creating the labyrinth and preparing the games. Third week, final preparations and setting everything up on the field. Sounds realistic, Harry agreed. Ron reached for another slice of pie. Excluding our work schedules, of course, my shop is swamped right now before Halloween. We'll manage, Hermione assured them. The main thing is to organize our time well. Ginny smiled. Together we always managed everything. Remember Hogwarts? It was the 4 of us against the whole world. And we won, Harry added quietly. They looked at each other, and in that gaze was their whole history, years of friendship, adventure, danger, and triumph. Now their adventure was different, but no less important. Now they were fighting, not for the survival of the world, but for the happiness of their children. And this battle was no less significant. So, shall we begin? Ron asked, raising his mug. They all raised their mugs and clinked them. "To a magical Halloween," they said in unison. And so began their preparation for the most unforgettable celebration their children had ever seen. Ahead were weeks of hard work, comical misunderstandings, magical experiments, and warm moments. But they were ready, because together, Harry, Ginny, Ron, and Hermione, they could create a true wonder. And that wonder, born of love and friendship, would become a memory that their children would carry with them throughout their lives. Monday morning dawned cold and misty. Harry stood by his kitchen window, gazing out at the garden where fallen leaves lay like a rug of gold and red. He held a mug of hot coffee, feeling the steam warm his face. Behind him, Ginny was helping the children dress. They were spending the day with Molly, so the adults could focus on the Halloween preparations. "Dad, why can't you stay with us?" James asked, fastening his cloak. His red hair was sticking up in all directions, and Harry couldn't help but smile. "I have important work matters, son," Harry said, crouching down in front of him. "But I'll be back this evening, and we'll play in the garden together. Deal?" James nodded, though disappointment was visible in his eyes. Albus walked over and hugged Harry's neck. "Will you bring us something interesting?" he whispered. Harry laughed. "Maybe I will. But it's a surprise." Little Lily ran up and hugged her father too, and for a moment, Harry felt like the luckiest man in the world, surrounded by the love of his children, in a warm home, with his wife by his side. These were the moments he had once fought for. As the children were ready, and Ginny apparated with them to the Burrow, Harry quickly changed and left the house. Ron was meeting him at the entrance to Diagon Alley in 15 minutes, and Harry didn't want to be late. He apparated to the Leaky Cauldron, the old pub that served as the entrance to the magical world from the Muggle side. Inside, it was dimly lit and cozy, smelling of ale and fried food. A few patrons sat at tables, talking in hushed voices. Tom, the landlord, nodded a greeting to Harry, and Harry returned it. Ron was already standing by the courtyard exit, dressed in a warm brown cloak. Seeing Harry, he grinned broadly. "Morning, mate. Ready for a spot of magical shopping?" Harry chuckled. "Ready. I hope Hermione gave you that list she made." Ron pulled a long roll of parchment from his pocket. "Naturally. 3 pages of detailed instructions on what to buy, where to buy it, and how much to spend. Sometimes I think she treats us like minors." He sighed, though there was affection in his voice. They stepped out into the courtyard, where a brick wall separated them from Diagon Alley. Ron touched the correct bricks with his wand, and the wall began to draw apart, opening the way to one of Britain's most famous wizarding streets. Diagon Alley in October was magnificent. Harry had always loved the place, but in the autumn it acquired a special charm. The street was dressed up for Halloween. Garlands of paper bats and ghosts hung overhead. The shop windows glowed with orange and purple light, and the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon, pumpkin, and magic. Magical pumpkins levitated near shop entrances, their carved faces either smiling or twisting into comical grimaces. Music was playing somewhere, an old, haunting melody that created a sense of mystery and wonder. Wizards and witches strolled the street, many of them already wearing festive hats or cloaks adorned with Halloween symbols. "Every time I come here, I feel 11 again," Harry said quietly, looking around. Ron nodded. "I know what you mean. Remember the first time we came here together? You couldn't believe it was all real." "Sometimes I still can't," Harry smiled. They began walking down the street, passing familiar shops. Ollivander's, the wand shop where Harry got his first wand. A room for any occasion, where you could find absolutely anything for any need. Elop's Owl Emporium, from which came the soft hooting of owls and other magical creatures. But their first stop was Weasley's, Wizard Wheezes, a brightly orange shop that stood out from the other buildings with its vibrancy and noise. The window glowed with multicolored lights, and a crowd of shoppers could be seen inside, examining the goods. "George said he had something special for us," Ron said, opening the door. They stepped inside, and Harry was immediately immersed in the familiar atmosphere of chaos and fun. The shop was overflowing with merchandise, from magical fireworks to love potions, from joke spells to protective amulets. Jars of multicolored potions stood on the shelves, boxes of fireworks, and masks that changed their expressions on their own. George Weasley was standing by the counter, talking to a customer. Seeing Harry and Ron, he grinned broadly, the same grin his twin brother Fred used to have. Though many years had passed since the Battle of Hogwarts, Harry still sometimes caught himself looking for a second red head next to George. "Harry! Ron!" George exclaimed, walking over to them. "Just in time. Come with me, I have something you'll like." He led them to the back of the shop, where new Halloween items were displayed on separate shelves. Harry looked around with curiosity. There were masks that changed the wearer's face, magical invisibility cloaks for children, with a limited duration, toy ghosts that flew and made cheerful noises. "Blimey," Ron whispered, picking up a dragon mask. "The kids will be thrilled." George raised a finger, smiling slyly. "That's not all. Look at this." He pointed to a row of small glass spheres that glowed from within in different colors. "These are theatrical phantoms. Safe, not scary, but very atmospheric. You activate them with magic, and they create the illusion of ghosts flying around. Perfect for children." "That's exactly what we need for the labyrinth," Harry exclaimed. "We'll take a dozen." George began stacking the spheres into a box, continuing to show off other items. "We also have magical fog. It creates a thick mist, but it's warm and smells of cinnamon and apples. Not cold or frightening. It just creates an air of mystery." Ron took a jar of the fog, turning it over in his hands. "And how long does it last?" "Up to 5 hours, depending on the area," George explained. 3 jars will be enough for the field by the Burrow." "Excellent. Add it to the list," Harry said, pulling out the parchment and making a note. George continued to show them various goods: magical firecrackers that exploded with purple sparks, music boxes that played festive tunes, even small enchanted pumpkins that carved faces onto themselves. "And here," George picked up a small mask with a goblin face, "is one of our newest developments. The mask doesn't just change the face, it also changes the voice. But be careful, it can only be removed with a specific countercharm." Ron took the mask, examining it with curiosity. "How does it work?" "Just put it on, and it activates itself. To take it off you have to say, 'Revelar Vuraman,'" George explained. Ron, ever the curious one, didn't wait. Before anyone could stop him, he placed the mask over his face. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the mask began to glow green, and Ron's face started to change. His nose became long and hooked, his skin acquired a greenish tint, and his ears stretched and sharpened. Within a second, a goblin stood before them instead of Ron. "Ron, you should be more careful," Harry said, trying not to laugh. Ron tried to say something, but his voice had changed. It was hoarse and squeaky, like a goblin's. "Get this off me," he exclaimed, his new voice sounding utterly comical. George laughed. "Say the spell, Revelar Verum." "Revelar Verum," Ron shouted, but nothing happened. George frowned. Odd. It should work. Ron tried again, then again, but the mask wouldn't budge. He began tugging at it with his hands, trying to pull it off, but the mask held firmly to his face. "George, what's going on?" Harry asked, starting to worry slightly. George scratched his head. "It must have been a defective model. It happens sometimes with new developments. Wait a minute, I'll find the countercharm." He hurried to the counter, searching through drawers for the instruction sheet. Ron, meanwhile, stood with his arms crossed, his goblin face expressing clear annoyance. "This isn't funny, Harry," he croaked. But Harry couldn't suppress a smile. Ron's appearance was too comical, the serious goblin expression, the red hair sticking out above the green skin. "Sorry, mate, but you look hilarious." George returned with a large book, quickly flipping through the pages. Right, here it is. The countercharm is more complicated than I thought. We need to use a combination of 3 spells." He raised his wand and began reciting the incantation, waving it around Ron's head. The mask began to glow, then crackled, and finally flew off Ron's face, returning to its normal shape. Ron touched his face, checking that everything was in place. "Finally! I thought I was going to be a goblin forever." George put the mask away from them. Sorry, Ron, that one isn't ready for sale yet. Take the others, they work fine. Ron shook his head. No, thank you. I've had enough experiments for one day. They spent another half an hour in the shop, choosing various Halloween items. George packed everything into several large boxes, and even gave them a family discount. Give the kids my love, he said goodbye. And if you need any help with the party organization, let me know. I'm always ready to lend a hand. Thanks, George, Harry said sincerely. You've been a great help. They left the shop, carrying boxes and packages. Ron still occasionally touched his face, as if assuring himself that it was indeed his own. Never wearing anything without reading the instructions first, he muttered. Harry laughed. You say that every time, but you always forget. Their next stop was a magical creatures shop, a small store with a sign shaped like a unicorn. Inside, it was quiet and peaceful, smelling of hay and something sweet. Cages lined the shelves with various magical creatures, tiny glowing fairies, fluffy puffskeins, and even a few nifflers trying to steal shiny objects from visitors. The shop owner, an elderly witch named Madame Kettleby, greeted them with a warm smile. Good day, gentlemen. How may I help you? Harry explained that they needed safe magical creatures for a children's party, something that looked interesting but posed no danger. Madame Kettleby thought for a moment, then led them to the back of the shop. I have just what you need. Theatrical fairies, they're created specifically for performances and celebrations. They glow, fly, and create beautiful patterns in the air, but they're completely harmless. Even if a child tries to catch them, the fairies will simply vanish and reappear elsewhere. She showed them a small glass sphere, inside which dozens of tiny glowing sparks flitted. How many do you have? Ron asked. I can give you 5 spheres. Each contains about 20 fairies. That should be enough for a large venue. Wonderful. We'll take them, Harry said. They also purchased a few enchanted butterflies that changed color, and small glowworms that sang soft melodies. Madame Kettleby carefully packed everything into special boxes with magical protection. I wish you a splendid celebration, she said goodbye. The children will be ecstatic. Their final stop was the magical decorations shop, a large store with a sign reading, Melody's Magical Embellishments. The window was filled with floating candles, self-illuminating pumpkins, garlands of magical lights, and other decorations. Inside, they were greeted by a young witch with bright purple hair. Today, looking for something special for Halloween? Harry nodded and explained that they needed to recreate the atmosphere of the Hogwarts Great Hall. Floating candles, magical pumpkins, charmed bats. The witch's eyes lit up. Oh, how romantic. I adore Hogwarts. I studied there once, in Ravenclaw. Come, I'll show you the best we have. She led them to the floating candles section. There were hundreds of different varieties, from small candles to large ones that glowed in various colors. These candles can be programmed for flight altitude and light intensity, she explained. They run on magical energy and can burn for up to 12 hours without needing a recharge. Ron picked up one candle, turning it over in his hands. Are they safe? They won't fall on anyone's head. Perfectly safe. Even if someone tries to catch them, they'll simply rise higher. Harry chose 100 candles of various sizes. Then they moved to the pumpkins, large orange ones that carved scary or cheerful faces onto themselves, depending on the surrounding mood. These pumpkins react to emotions, the witch explained. If the children laugh, the pumpkins smile. If someone is scared, they make frightful faces, but all within reason, of course. Perfect, Harry said. We'll take 2 dozen. They also purchased charmed bats that flew in circles and entertained rather than frightened, magical fog in various colors, and garlands of lights that flickered like stars. When they finally left the shop, their arms were full of boxes and packages. Ron sighed. How are we going to get all this home? Harry smiled and pulled out his wand. Magic, Ron. Magic. He cast a levitation charm, and all the boxes rose into the air, obediently following them. They walked to the leaky cauldron and apparated straight to the Potter's house, where they left most of the purchases, and then Ron took his share and headed home. Harry stood in his living room, looking at the pile of boxes, and felt satisfied. The first day of preparation was a success. There was still a lot of work ahead, but they were moving in the right direction. Meanwhile, Hermione and Ginny were busy with their part of the preparations. Hermione spent most of the day in the Ministry of Magic library, a vast hall filled with ancient books and scrolls. High windows let in soft daylight that fell onto the wooden tables where wizards sat, lost in reading. Hermione loved this place. Here, she always felt at home, among books, knowledge, and history. She went to the section dedicated to magical holidays and traditions, and began searching for information on Halloween. Most people only knew superficial facts about the holiday, that it had Celtic origins, that it was once believed that the veil between the world of the living and the dead thinned on this night. But Hermione wanted to find something deeper, something that would make their celebration not just entertaining, but also meaningful. She pulled an ancient tome, titled Magical Traditions of Ancient Britain, from the shelf, and opened it. The pages smelled of old parchment and time. Hermione carefully turned them, reading about old rituals. It turned out that in ancient times, wizards used Halloween not only for celebration but also for protective rituals. They lit magical fires that were supposed to shield their homes from dark forces for the coming year. They created amulets from autumn leaves and pumpkins that brought luck and prosperity. Hermione took detailed notes, her quill quickly gliding across the parchment. She found a description of an ancient spell called Light of the Ancestors, where wizards evoked warm, bright memories of those they had lost, creating the illusion of fireflies dancing in the air. This was not the dark magic of necromancy. It was a celebration of life and the love that endures even after death. She imagined how this might look at their party. Soft lights, symbolizing love and memories, dancing over the children's heads. It would be beautiful and meaningful. Hermione spent several hours in the library, immersed in her research. She found a recipe for an ancient pumpkin drink that brought warmth and joy, a description of magical games that children played hundreds of years ago, and even old songs that were sung during Halloween. When she finally closed the last book, her notebook was filled with notes. She had enough material to create a truly special program, one that would not only entertain the children, but also teach them something important about tradition, history, and magic. She gathered the books and returned them to the librarian, then left the ministry, feeling satisfied. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Meanwhile, Ginny spent the day at home, designing the plan for the magical labyrinth and the Quidditch games. She sat at the living room table, surrounded by sheets of parchment on which she drew diagrams and took notes. The labyrinth was meant to be thrilling, not frightening, with twists, puzzles, and magical illusions. Ginny imagined the children stepping inside, their eyes widening with wonder when they saw the glowing fairies flitting in the air, as they solved riddles and passed through mysterious corridors. She divided the labyrinth into several zones. The first zone, the entrance, decorated with magical lights and garlands. The second zone, a corridor of mirrors that showed funny reflections. The third zone, a riddle room where children had to guess simple magical riddles to open the next passage. The fourth zone, a hall with fairies and glowworms where they could simply enjoy the beauty. And the fifth, final zone, the exit, leading to the main celebration area. Regarding the Quidditch games, Ginny knew she had to be careful. The children were still young, and a full match would be too dangerous. Instead, she planned to create several simple games on low-flying broomsticks. The first game, Catch the Stars. Magical stars levitated at a low height, and the children had to catch them while flying their brooms. The second game, Flight Through the Hoops. Several magical hoops hung in the air, and the children had to fly through them. The third game, Quidditch Bowling. The children had to knock down magical pins by throwing a ball while sitting on a broom. Ginny smiled, imagining James trying to win every game, Albus diligently performing every task, and little Lily laughing as she flew on her first broomstick. When Harry returned home that evening, Ginny showed him her diagrams. They sat at the table, examining the plans for the labyrinth and the Quidditch games, discussing the details. "This looks incredible," Harry said, studying the drawings. "The children will be thrilled with the labyrinth." Ginny smiled, brushing a strand of red hair from her face. "I want it to be more than just a labyrinth. I want it to be a real adventure. For them to feel like explorers discovering secrets." Harry placed his hand on hers. You always know how to make ordinary things magical." They both laughed, and then Harry told her about his day with Ron, about the visit to Diagon Alley, the Goblin Mask adventure, and all the marvelous things they had purchased. "Ron got stuck in some magical contraption again," Ginny laughed. "Nothing ever changes." "It was his own fault," Harry smiled. "George even warned him." They spent the evening discussing plans for the coming days. Tomorrow, Hermione was coming over to share her findings from the library, and Ginny planned to meet with her former teammates to discuss the Quidditch games and borrow children's broomsticks. The next day, the Potter's house was filled with cheerful noise. Hermione arrived in the morning with Rose and Hugo, and the children immediately ran off to play with James, Albus, and Lily. The 5 children chased each other around the garden, their laughter echoing in the cool October air. Hermione sat down at the kitchen table with Harry and Ginny, laying out her notebook and a few books she had brought from the library. "You won't believe what I found," she began, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Halloween has a much deeper meaning than just a festival of horrors. In ancient times, wizards used this day for protective rituals and to celebrate life." She began to recount her discoveries about the Light of the Ancestors spell, the ancient games, and the traditional drinks and songs. Harry and Ginny listened attentively, occasionally asking questions. "That spell with the fireflies sounds beautiful," Ginny said. "We can use it during the evening part of the celebration. It will create a wonderful atmosphere," Hermione nodded. "That's exactly what I thought. But we need to practice it. The spell is quite complex. It requires concentration on happy memories," Harry pondered. Happy memories. He had many of them: his first meeting with Ron on the train, his first flight on a broomstick, his first kisses with Ginny, the birth of his children. Every memory was filled with warmth and love. "We'll manage," he said confidently. "We have time to practice." They spent the next hour discussing the party program. Hermione suggested creating several interactive stations where the children could learn about Halloween traditions in a fun way. For example, a magical amulet-making station, she explained. "The children can create their own amulets from leaves and ribbons, and we'll enchant them to glow." "It will be both fun and educational," Ginny supported the idea. "And we could also do a pumpkin painting station. Not carving, but painting with magical paints that glow in the dark," Harry added his suggestion. "How about a photo station, a magical camera that takes moving pictures? The children love that." Ideas flowed one after another, and Hermione barely managed to write everything down. The list grew longer and longer, but none of the ideas seemed superfluous. Each one added something special to the overall picture. When they finished the discussion, Hermione closed her notebook and looked at them with a smile. "You know, I think this will be the best party our children have ever seen. Not because it's the most expensive or the most spectacular, but because it's filled with love." Harry felt a pang of emotion in his chest. Hermione was right. Love was what made this celebration special: the love of parents for their children, the love of friends for each other, the love for magic and for life. "Yes," he said quietly. "Exactly." Ginny stood up and walked to the window, watching the children playing in the garden. James was trying to teach little Hugo some magical trick, Rose and Albus were sitting under a tree discussing something, and Lily was running around, collecting fallen leaves. "They're so carefree," Ginny whispered. "Sometimes I forget how important it is to preserve that childish sense of wonder about the world." Hermione walked up to her, hugging her shoulders. "That's why we're doing this, to give them memories that will remind them that the world can be magical and marvelous." They stood there for a few minutes, 3 best friends, parents, partners in this new adventure. Outside the window, the children were laughing, and the autumn sun gently illuminated the garden with golden light. Throughout the next few days, the preparations gained momentum. Harry and Ron spent another day in Diagon Alley, purchasing the last items on Hermione's list. Ginny met with her former Holyhead Harpies teammates, and they gladly agreed to lend children's broomsticks and even offered to come to the party to help organize the games. Hermione, meanwhile, worked on the program, creating a detailed schedule: when and what should happen, how much time was needed for each activity, and how to organize the transitions between zones. Her organizational skills were invaluable, and Harry once again thought how lucky he was to have such a friend. but the most touching moments were when the children unknowingly helped their parents with the preparations. One evening, when Harry was unpacking some decorations in the living room, James and Albus came up to him, interested. "Dad, what is this?" James asked, pointing to the box of floating candles. Harry hesitated for a moment, but then decided to involve them. "These are decorations for a special project. Want to help me unpack them?" James's eyes shone. "Yes, Albus, come on, let's help Dad." They sat on the floor, and Harry began carefully taking out the candles, explaining how they worked. The boys listened spellbound, their little hands diligently arranging the candles in rows. "Do they really fly?" Albus asked, his green eyes, so similar to Harry's, looking up at his father with curiosity. "Yes," Harry smiled. "When we activate them with magic, they take off and hang in the air." James reached out, trying to touch one of the candles. "Can we try now?" "Not yet," Harry said gently, "but you'll see everything soon, I promise." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Ginny was busy with Lily and Hugo. Little Lily sat at the table, drawing pumpkins on large sheets of paper. Her red braids stuck out to one side, and a smear of orange paint was on her nose. "Mum, look!" she exclaimed, holding up her drawing. "I drew a big pumpkin with a smile." Ginny crouched beside her, hugging her daughter. "It's beautiful, my love. Such a cheerful pumpkin." Hugo, sitting nearby, drew his pumpkin with a scary face, but it looked more comical than frightening. His red hair, just like Ron's, stuck out everywhere, and his tongue poked out from the corner of his mouth with concentration. "And my pumpkin is the scariest," he declared proudly. Ginny laughed. "Very scary, Hugo. I would certainly be frightened if I saw such a pumpkin at night." Hugo beamed with pride and continued drawing with even greater enthusiasm. At the same time, Hermione sat at the dining room table with Rose, going through books and work notes. Rose, who at 8 already showed signs of her mother's intellect, listened carefully and even took her own notes in her little notebook. "Mum, is it true that ancient wizards considered Halloween a magical night?" she asked, reading over Hermione's shoulder. Hermione smiled, seeing her daughter's interest in history. "Yes, my love. They believed that magic became especially strong on this night, and you could cast spells that wouldn't work at other times." Rose pondered, her brown hair, as curly as her mother's, falling over her face. "And are we going to do something magical this Halloween?" Hermione hugged her daughter, kissing the top of her head. "Yes, I think we're going to create something truly special. But it's a surprise, so you'll have to wait." Rose nodded, though curiosity was visible in her eyes. She returned to her notes, diligently recording facts about Halloween that she had read in her mother's book. These moments, when the children unknowingly became part of the preparation, were the most precious. Harry, Ginny, Ron and Hermione understood that they were not just creating a party, but memories. And every small detail, every minute spent together, became a part of those memories. By the end of the first week, the main materials were gathered, the plans were drawn up, and the tasks were distributed. On Friday evening, all four gathered again at the Potter's house, this time without the children, who stayed with Molly and Arthur. They sat in the living room by the fireplace, where the logs crackled merrily. A bottle of fire whiskey and 4 glasses stood on the table. The atmosphere was relaxed, yet filled with the anticipation of much more work to come. "So," Hermione began, raising her glass, "the first week is behind us. We've collected decorations, created plans, and defined the program. What's next?" Ron took a sip of the whiskey and coughed. The drink was strong. "Next week we have to start building the labyrinth and setting up the Quidditch zone. That will take a few days." Ginny nodded. "And I've arranged with the girls from the team. They'll come on Wednesday and help set up the brooms and check the safety of the games." Harry looked at the task list lying on the table. "We also need to start practicing that firefly spell Hermione talked about. It sounds complicated, and I want to be sure we can execute it." Hermione smiled. "We can practice tomorrow. The spell requires concentration on happy memories, something similar to a Patronus, but softer and warmer." They discussed the details for another hour, until the fire in the hearth began to die down. Harry felt a pleasant fatigue, not exhausting, but satisfying, the kind that comes after productive work. When Ron and Hermione were ready to leave, they all stood by the door, saying goodbye. 2 more weeks, Ron said, smiling, and we'll create the best Halloween in history. Yes, Hermione agreed. But even if something doesn't go according to plan, the main thing is that we're doing it together. Harry hugged them both. Together, we've always managed everything. This is no exception. Ginny walked over and added her hug. Until tomorrow, get some rest. A busy week is ahead. When the door closed behind Ron and Hermione, Harry and Ginny remained standing in the living room, watching the fire die down in the fireplace. Ginny leaned against Harry, resting her head on his shoulder. Are you happy? She asked quietly. Harry held her tighter. Yes, very. I have everything I once dreamed of. Family, friends, a home, and the opportunity to create something special for our children. Ginny lifted her head and kissed him. I'm happy too, and you know what? I think this Halloween will be special not just for the children, but for us too. We're feeling that magic again, the one we felt at Hogwarts, when everything seemed possible. Harry smiled, knowing she was right. Over the past week, he truly had felt something akin to that marvelous sense of adventure that accompanied him in his youth. Only now the adventure was different, not a dangerous battle, but the joyful creation of a holiday for those he loved. They went upstairs, checked that the children were sleeping soundly in their beds, and went to sleep. Outside the window, the October night was quiet and peaceful, and the stars shone brightly in the dark sky, as if promising that something wonderful awaited them ahead. The first week of preparation was successful. Materials were gathered, plans were made, and the first steps were taken, but there was still a lot of work ahead. The labyrinth, decorations, rehearsals, and final preparations. And every day brought them closer to that special Halloween that their children would remember for a lifetime. And for now, in the stillness of the night, in the cozy house where 3 children and 2 adults slept, the magic quietly grew, not in the form of spells or charms, but in the form of love, friendship, and hope. And that magic was the strongest of all. October relentlessly rolled towards its close, and with each passing day the air grew colder, and the leaves on the trees brighter. A week before Halloween, the atmosphere in the Potter and Weasley families was electric, not with stress, but with the joyful anticipation that everything they had worked so hard on would finally come to life. On Sunday morning, with the sky clear and blue, and the air smelling of fallen leaves and approaching winter, Harry woke up earlier than everyone else. He went down to the kitchen, made coffee, and stood by the window, looking out at the garden. Today was the day they would begin the most important part of the preparation, creating the main location near the Burrow. Ginny came down a few minutes later, still sleepy but with a smile on her face. Big day, she whispered, hugging Harry from behind. It is, he nodded, turning and kissing her forehead. Everything is finally starting to feel real. The children were still asleep, and they decided not to wake them. The adults had a lot of work today that was better done without curious eyes. Molly had agreed to take all 5 children for the entire day, which gave them time to work undisturbed. When the sun rose higher, Harry and Ginny apparated to the Burrow with the children. Molly was already waiting at the door, her face glowing with joy at the sight of her grandchildren. My darlings, she exclaimed, hugging each one. Come inside, I've made breakfast. The children ran towards the house with cheerful noise, while Harry and Ginny lingered for a moment. Thank you for looking after them today, Ginny said. We have a lot of work. Molly waved her hand. Nonsense, dear. I adore spending time with my grandchildren. By the way, Arthur is already on the field, preparing the area. Ron and Hermione should arrive in half an hour, and George promised to be here by 10. Harry nodded. Wonderful. We'll head out then. If the children ask where we are, tell them we have important business, but we'll be back this evening. They walked through the Burrow's garden, past the old pond and the vegetable patch where Arthur once grew magical plants. The field was located beyond a small grove, and as they emerged from the trees, Harry saw Arthur already there. The older man in a muggle jumper was standing in the middle of the clearing, surveying the area. Harry, Ginny, he greeted them cheerfully. I've already started marking out the zones. Look, this will be the central area with decorations. Here will be the labyrinth, and over there, the Quidditch zone. He pointed to different parts of the clearing where wooden stakes had already been driven into the ground with ropes strung between them. An improvised layout. Harry looked around. The field looked peaceful and quiet. Just an open space surrounded by trees. But in a week, it would transform into a truly magical place. He could already imagine the floating candles hanging here, the magical lights shining between the trees, and the children running, laughing, and looking around in awe. Ron and Hermione soon arrived. Ron carried a huge toolbox filled with tools and magical devices, and Hermione held her familiar notebook and a scroll with detailed diagrams. "Morning!" Ron exclaimed, placing the box on the ground. "Ready for some hard labor?" "Ready," Harry smiled. "Let's start with the protective charms. We need to make sure the area is safe." Arthur, Harry, and Ron formed a circle, raising their wands. Hermione opened her notebook, reading out the instructions. "First, Protego Totalum for overall protection. Then, we'll add the Muggle-repelling charm. And finally, a safety charm for the children. If one of them falls or flies too high on a broomstick, the magic will gently lower them to the ground." They began casting the spells. Harry concentrated on every word, feeling the magic flow through his wand and spread across the clearing. The air shimmered, becoming denser, as if an invisible dome had covered the entire area. Ron finished his spell and wiped the sweat from his brow. "Phew! Phew! These protective charms always take a lot of energy." "But it's worth it," Ginny said, checking the strength of the protective field with a magical detector. "Now the children will be completely safe." Just then, George appeared, apparating with a characteristic pop right onto the edge of the clearing. He was carrying several large boxes that levitated behind him. "Greetings, esteemed builders of the Enchanted Kingdom," he exclaimed with a theatrical gesture. "I've brought the best of the best for our celebration." He lowered the boxes to the ground, and everyone gathered around, curiously peering inside. There were additional magical decorations, fireworks, theatrical fog, and a few more joke items. "George, you're incredible," Ginny laughed. "Just please, no pranks while we're working." George clutched his hand to his heart. "I am wounded. Do I look like the type to pull pranks during important work?" Everyone looked at him suspiciously, and he burst out laughing. All right, I promise to be serious, most of the time anyway." They divided into groups. Harry, Arthur, and George began creating the structures for the labyrinth. Magical walls made of intertwined branches and leaves that looked natural but were sturdy enough. Ron and Hermione set about installing the floating candles, and Ginny started marking out the Quidditch zone. The work was intense but enjoyable. The air was filled with the sounds of incantations, laughter, and friendly banter. Harry felt his muscles tighten from the physical labor. He hadn't done anything like this in a long time, and it was actually satisfying. Arthur turned out to be unexpectedly talented at building structures. His hands, accustomed to working with Muggle mechanisms, deftly wove the branches together, creating beautiful patterns. "You know," he said, working on the entrance arch to the labyrinth, "I always dreamed of creating something like this for Molly. She adores holidays, and this would have been a wonderful gift. Maybe after Halloween, we can help you create something special for her," Harry suggested. "For Christmas, perhaps," Arthur smiled. "That would be a lovely idea." Meanwhile, Ron struggled with the floating candles. He raised his wand, cast the spell, and the candles flew into the air. But instead of hovering at the required height, they began flying around chaotically, like mad bees. "What? Stop!" Ron exclaimed, waving his wand and trying to control them. Hermione laughed. "Ron, you have to cast the spell slower. The candles react to the tempo of your voice." Ron tried again, this time slower and clearer. The candles calmed down and began taking their positions at different heights, creating a beautiful composition. "Finally," he sighed, "these enchanted things sometimes have a mind of their own." George, meanwhile, was charming the decorative pumpkins. He placed them around the perimeter of the field and began laying charms on them to make them glow and change facial expressions. But something went wrong. One of the pumpkins suddenly shot into the air and began chasing Ron, its carved face smiling a little too broadly. "Hey!" Ron shouted, running from the pumpkin. "George, do something," George roared with laughter, doubling over. Sorry, I must have overdone the movement charm. He raised his wand and stopped the pumpkin, which gently landed on the ground, its smile now looking apologetic. You did that on purpose, Ron accused, catching his breath. Maybe a little, George admitted with a sly smile, but admit it, it was fun. Even Ron couldn't suppress a smile. All right, it was a little funny, but don't do it again. Harry was working on creating the flying bat effect. He used an illusion spell that was supposed to create translucent bats flying in circles above the clearing. He focused, cast the spell, and the bats appeared, but something was wrong. Instead of slightly mysterious and atmospheric bats, they came out cute, too cute. With large eyes, fluffy wings, and smiles that looked more like a puppy's. Ginny walked over, looked at the bats and laughed. Harry, they look like toys for Lily. Harry sighed. I know, something went wrong with the spell. I must have been thinking about the children, and the magic reflected that. Arthur walked up, examining the bats. Actually, this isn't bad. The children won't be scared, and the bats create atmosphere. Maybe we should leave them like this. Harry considered it, then nodded. Why not? They do look friendly. The work continued until lunchtime. Molly brought them a basket of food, sandwiches, pies, and a thermos of hot tea. They sat on the grass, resting and admiring what they had already accomplished. The field was starting to transform. Floating candles hung in the air at various heights, creating a magical atmosphere. The entrance arch to the labyrinth looked mysterious and inviting. The pumpkins, the ones that weren't chasing people, glowed with a soft orange light. The cute bats flew in circles overhead. It already looks incredible, Hermione said, chewing a sandwich, and we're not even finished yet. Imagine what it will look like when everything is done, Ginny added. The children are going to be in absolute shock. After lunch they continued their work. Ginny focused on the Quidditch zone, setting up safe magical hoops at a low height, arranging the children's broomsticks, and creating an area for simple games. She used her sports knowledge and player experience to make everything as safe as possible, while still being engaging. Ron helped her, checking every broomstick for safety. He remembered stories of accidents during Quidditch matches, and wanted to ensure their children wouldn't suffer even the slightest injury. Harry and George, meanwhile, worked on completing the labyrinth. They created different zones, corridors with soft walls, rooms with magical illusions, and places for riddles. Everything was designed to be interesting, but not frightening. Arthur and Hermione handled the final adjustments to the protective charms and the creation of the magical sky. They used a complex spell that was supposed to turn the ordinary sky above the clearing into a real starry show, with shooting stars, magical constellations, and even a small imitation of the northern lights. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they stepped back and surveyed their work. The field had transformed. It was no longer just an open space. It was now a magical place, filled with wonder and charm. The floating candles created a soft, golden light. The labyrinth looked mysterious and beckoning, and the Quidditch zone promised hours of fun. Unbelievable, Harry whispered. We actually did it. Ron clapped him on the shoulder. Did you doubt it? They all laughed, feeling tired but immensely satisfied. But that's not all, Hermione reminded them. There are still a few days of work ahead. We need to add the final touches, set up the game stations, and prepare the food. Ginny nodded. Yes, but the hardest part is behind us. They returned to the Burrow, where the children were already waiting for them, full of energy after a day spent with Grandma. James immediately ran up to Harry. Dad, where were you? Grandma wouldn't tell us. Harry crouched down, hugging his son. I had very important business. But you'll find out what soon. I promise. The next few days flew by in a blur of preparation. Hermione and Molly focused on the menu, baking pumpkin pies, preparing magical sweets, and ordering special non-alcoholic butterbeer for the children. Hermione enchanted the pies to glow with a soft orange light from within when they were cut. Ginny, along with some of her former teammates, set up the final details of the Quidditch zone, checking and rechecking every safety element. Harry and Ron tested all the magical effects, making sure everything worked perfectly. They practiced the Light of the Ancestors spell that Hermione had found in the library. It turned out to be harder than they expected. They had to concentrate on the happiest memories, feel the warmth and love, and only then would the magic work. Harry sat in the clearing, closing his eyes, and remembering his first meeting with Ron on the train, his first flight on a broomstick, the first Christmas at Hogwarts, kissing Ginny after winning the Quidditch Cup, James's birth, Albus's first smile, Lily's laugh. He felt warmth spread through his chest and raised his wand. A tiny golden spark flew from its tip, turning into a firefly. Then another. And another. Soon, dozens of golden fireflies danced around him, like living memories. "It's beautiful," Hermione whispered, watching from the side. Harry opened his eyes and smiled. The fireflies slowly disappeared, but the feeling of warmth remained. "It is. This is truly special magic." The day before Halloween, after the children were asleep, the four friends gathered again in the clearing. It was late evening, the moon shone brightly, and the stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. They stood in the middle of the field, looking at everything they had created. Floating candles flickered softly, the pumpkins smiled, and the labyrinth looked mysterious in the moonlight. Harry took Ginny's hand, and they stood there, holding each other. He felt her warmth, her life, her love, flow through his palm. "Sometimes, I can't believe we're here," he said quietly. "After everything we've been through. After the war, the losses, the pain. And now we're standing here, preparing a party for our children." Ginny leaned against him. "These are the moments we fought for. To have the chance to live, to love, to be happy. So our children never have to know the horror we knew." Ron and Hermione walked closer, and all four stood together, looking up at the starry sky. "Remember our first Halloween at Hogwarts?" Ron asked. "When we saved Hermione from the troll," Hermione laughed. "How could I forget? I thought you were both insane. Two first-year boys running into the dungeons against a troll." "But we did it," Harry said, "and from that day on we became friends." "More than friends," Hermione added softly. "We became family." They stood in silence for a few minutes, just being together under the starry sky. The air was cold, but they were warm, from their closeness, from the memories, from the love. Harry thought about everything they had endured: Voldemort, the Horcruxes, the Battle of Hogwarts, about those they had lost: Sirius, Lupin, Tonks, Fred, Dobby, Snape. About the pain, fear, and despair. But he also thought about the hope that never faded, about the friendship that withstood all trials, about the love that conquered death, about the life they had built after the war. "I'm grateful," he suddenly said, his voice trembling with emotion. "For everything. For you. For our children. For the chance to stand here, under the stars, and know that tomorrow will give our children a day they will remember forever." Ginny squeezed his hand tighter. "We're all grateful." Hermione wiped a tear that rolled down her cheek. "This is more than just a celebration. It's a symbol that good has won, that love is stronger than hate, that we have the right to be happy." Ron hugged her, then reached out his other hand to Harry. All four stood in an embrace, forming a circle, unbreakable, strong, filled with love. "To tomorrow," Ron said, "to the magic we'll create, to the smiles on our children's faces." "To family," Ginny added. "To friendship," Hermione said. "To love," Harry finished. "To the love that makes life worth living." They stood like that for a few more minutes, then slowly stepped away from each other. It was time to go. A big day awaited them tomorrow, and they needed rest. But before leaving, Harry turned once more and looked at the field. At the floating candles flickering in the darkness. At the labyrinth, waiting for its little explorers. At the Quidditch zone, where children's laughter would echo tomorrow. Everything was ready. Decorations were set up, charms were cast, food was prepared, and a program was planned. Tomorrow, the 31st of October, this field would host the best Halloween their children had ever seen. But for Harry, it was more than just a celebration. It was a confirmation of what he had fought for all his life. It was proof that even after the darkest night, dawn always comes, that love always wins, that magic exists not only in spells but also in the hearts of people. He turned to his friends, and they walked back to the burrow together, leaving the field to sleep under the starry sky. Tomorrow, it would awaken to life, filled with laughter and joy. But for now it rested, preparing for its most important day. And in the Potter's house, 3 children slept, unaware of the enchantment that awaited them tomorrow. James dreamed of flying on a broomstick. Albus smiled in his sleep, hugging his favorite toy. Lily snored softly, her small hand resting on the pillow. And above all of them, like an invisible shield, hovered the warmth of parental love, the most powerful magic of all that exists in this world. Tomorrow was Halloween, and it promised to be unforgettable. The morning of the 31st of October arrived quietly and softly, as if on the wings of a bird. The first rays of sun broke through the curtains in James Sirius Potter's bedroom, and the boy opened his eyes, immediately sensing that today was special. Something unusual hovered in the air, an anticipation, a promise, a magic. He sat up in bed, listening. Sounds drifted from the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, quiet voices of his parents, and a strange aroma that made his stomach rumble with hunger. It smelled of cinnamon, pumpkin, honey, and something else. Something magical. James jumped out of bed and ran to his brother's room. Albus was still asleep, tightly hugging his plush dragon. James gently nudged his shoulder. "Albus, wake up! It's Halloween!" Albus slowly opened his eyes, his green eyes, so like his father's. Initially sleepy, but then interest sparked in them. "Halloween?" he mumbled. "Already?" "Yes. Come on downstairs. It smells incredible." The boys descended the stairs together, their bare feet quietly padding on the wooden steps. Movement was also heard from Lily's room. The little girl had also awakened, drawn by the smells and the anticipation of the holiday. When the 3 children entered the kitchen, they saw a real enchantment. Harry stood by the stove, cooking something in a large pan, and Ginny was setting the table. But this was no ordinary breakfast. Plates of pumpkin pancakes stood on the table, shimmering slightly, with golden light. Next to them were pitchers of drinks that shimmered with all shades of orange and red, like liquid autumn. Magical candles in the shape of small pumpkins stood in the center of the table, their flames dancing without a breeze. "Good morning, my darlings," Ginny exclaimed joyfully upon seeing the children. "Happy Halloween!" "Mum, Dad," Lily cried, running up and hugging both of them. "It's so beautiful!" Harry knelt down, hugging his daughter. "Today is a special day, Princess. A very special day." James looked around with wide eyes. "Those pancakes are glowing!" "And the drinks are strange too," Ginny laughed. "They're magical pumpkin pancakes. They don't just glow. When you eat them, you feel warmth and joy inside. And the drinks, that special autumn nectar, completely safe, but very tasty." Albus cautiously approached the table, his scientific mind already at work. "How did you make the pancakes glow?" Harry smiled, putting a few more pancakes on a plate. "That's a secret of family magic. I'll teach you when you're older." The children sat down at the table, and the magical breakfast began. The pancakes were truly incredible, sweet, with a light taste of cinnamon and honey, and when James took the first bite, he felt warmth spread through his body, as if he were being hugged from the inside. "These are the best pancakes I've ever eaten," he exclaimed, reaching for another one. Lily drank the autumn nectar in small sips, her eyes shining with delight. "It tastes like golden leaves and sunlight." Ginny and Harry exchanged glances, smiling. This was exactly the reaction they wanted to see. When breakfast was over, the sound of the fireplace rang out. Someone had used the flu network. In a moment, Ron, Hermione, Rose and Hugo appeared in the living room. The children immediately ran to meet them, shouting with joy. "Rose, Hugo!" Lily cried, rushing to hug her cousins. The 5 children gathered, all brimming with energy and the anticipation of something special. Rose, the eldest of the younger children, looked around attentively, trying to understand what was happening. "Uncle Harry, why is the atmosphere so strange today?" she asked, tilting her head. "It's like something magical is floating in the air." Harry exchanged a look with Ron, who could barely contain his smile. "Maybe it's just Halloween," Harry said mysteriously, "or maybe it's something more." James immediately became alert. "What do you mean? Did you plan something?" Ron put on an innocent face. "Us? Plan? Never." but Hermione gently elbowed him. "Ron, don't lie to the children." The children immediately surrounded the adults, their eyes burning with curiosity. "Tell us, what did you come up with?" James insisted. Ginny knelt down to be at eye level with the children. "It's a surprise, darlings, but I promise, it will be something you remember for the rest of your lives." "When? When will we find out?" Albus asked, his patience already wearing thin. "After lunch," Harry said. "And for now, maybe you can help us decorate the house for Halloween." This idea distracted the children, and they enthusiastically rushed to help. The adults pulled out boxes of decorations, paper garlands in the shape of ghosts and bats, small pumpkins, magical candles. The children hung everything around the house, laughing and joking. James and Albus competed to see who could hang the garland higher. Rose diligently arranged the candles, making sure everything was symmetrical. Lily and Hugo drew cheerful faces on the pumpkins with glow-in-the-dark paints. The atmosphere in the house was warm and joyful. The adults watched the children, exchanging smiles. Something truly special hovered in the air. Not just the magic of spells, but the magic of family, love, and anticipation. Hermione quietly approached Harry while the children were busy. "Are you ready for tonight?" she whispered. Harry nodded. "Yes. Everything is ready. Molly and Arthur are already on the field, making the final preparations. George will arrive later. Everything should be perfect." "It will be perfect," Hermione assured him. "You'll see." The morning transitioned into lunch. Molly and Arthur joined them, bringing more baskets of food. The table was set with a festive lunch: roast turkey with pumpkin stuffing, vegetable stews made from autumn produce, freshly baked bread that smelled so good everyone's mouths watered. The entire family gathered at the table, 3 generations of Weasleys and Potters. The children sat on one side, the adults on the other, and at the head of the table, Molly and Arthur, the patriarchs of the family, looking at everyone with pride and love. During lunch, the children tried to wheedle information about the evening surprise out of the adults. James was particularly persistent. "Dad, just one hint, please." Harry pretended to think. "All right, one hint. It's related to flying." All the children groaned. "Dad, everything is related to flying. We're wizards." Ron couldn't resist adding, "I can tell you there will be flying." Hermione sharply covered his mouth with her hand. "Ron, don't you dare!" But it was too late. The children immediately became alert. "Flying what?" Rose asked, her mind already trying to solve the riddle. "Flying broomsticks, floating candles, flying saucers." Ron looked guilty, and Hermione shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Now you'll have to wait patiently and find out for yourselves," she said. The rest of lunch passed in a cheerful atmosphere, although the children were so excited they could barely eat. They constantly looked at the clock, asking when the time would finally come. After lunch, Ginny announced, "All right, children, time to put on your costumes." This sparked a new wave of excitement. The children ran upstairs, where specially prepared costumes awaited them. James immediately chose a hero auror costume, a dark cloak embroidered with silver stars, a toy magical wand that glowed blue, and a badge on his chest with the inscription Trainee Auror. "I'll be like Dad," he proudly declared, putting on the cloak. "I'll catch dark wizards." Albus chose a dragon costume, a green jumpsuit with wings, a tail, and a hood shaped like a dragon's head. When he put it on, he looked like the most good-natured little dragon imaginable. "I'm a fire-breathing dragon," he exclaimed, trying to breathe imaginary fire from his mouth. Rose, true to her nature, chose a clever witch costume. It was an elegant purple cloak, a bowler hat with a star on top, and a mini backpack filled with toy books and scrolls. She looked like a young Professor McGonagall. "Knowledge is power," she said seriously, adjusting her hat. Lily took a long time choosing between a fairy and a unicorn costume, but ultimately decided to combine both. She wore a white dress with rainbow wings and a tiara with a toy unicorn horn. She looked like a creature from a fairy tale. "I'm a magical fairy unicorn," she declared, spinning in front of the mirror. Hugo chose a simple but effective costume of a little wizard, a blue cloak with stars and moons, a tall hat, and a magical wand with a bright star on the end. "I'm going to do big magic," he said, waving his wand. When all the children gathered together in their costumes, the adults couldn't stop smiling. 5 little wizards stood before them, radiating joy and anticipation. Ginny took several magical photos where the images moved. The children waved their hands, laughed, and hugged. "You all look incredible," she said warmly. "True Halloween heroes." Harry looked at the clock. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun had already begun to set, and the sky was taking on golden hues. "All right," he said solemnly, "time to go." The children immediately became agitated. Where are we going?" James asked. "To the Burrow," Ron replied. "But not to the house itself. To one special place." They all left the house. The autumn breeze gently rustled the leaves, and the air smelled of earth and cold. The sky was clear, promising a bright evening. The adults took the children's hands, and they apparated to the outskirts of the Burrow. Once there, they walked, through the garden, past the pond, through the small grove. The children walked with bated breath, looking around. The October landscape was beautiful. The trees stood in golden and red attire, the leaves quietly falling, creating a carpet underfoot. The pre-sunset sun colored everything in warm shades, as if the world were immersed in honey and fire. "It's so beautiful," Rose whispered, looking at the trees. "It's the magic of autumn," Hermione replied gently, "the purest and most natural magic." They were approaching the field. Harry felt his heart beating faster. Now the children would see what they had worked on for so long. "All right, children," he said when they stopped at the edge of the grove. "Close your eyes, and don't open them until we say." The children obeyed, though their bodies trembled with impatience. The adults took their hands and led them forward, through the last trees, onto the field itself. When they were in the center, Harry looked around. Everything was ready. The floating candles had already begun to glow in the twilight. The pumpkins were smiling. The labyrinth looked mysterious. The Quidditch zone awaited its little pilots. Ginny squeezed Harry's hand. Hermione smiled at Ron. Molly and Arthur stood aside, their eyes shining with tears of joy. "All right," Harry said quietly. "Open your eyes." And the children opened them. First, there was silence. Absolute, total silence of astonishment. 5 pairs of eyes widened, mouths dropped open, and for a few seconds the world seemed to freeze. And then, "Woo!" James shouted, his voice trembling with excitement. It's unbelievable," Rose whispered, not believing her eyes. "Dad, Mum, is this for us?" Albus exclaimed. Lily just stood there, looking around with such an expression of wonder on her face that Harry felt his chest tighten with emotion. A true magical Halloween land unfolded before them. Floating candles hung in the air at different heights, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, creating the illusion of a starry sky descending to the ground. They flickered and danced, their soft golden light illuminating the entire clearing with a magical glow. Huge pumpkins stood around the perimeter, their carved faces smiling and winking. Some glowed orange, others purple, green, even blue. They changed facial expressions, reacting to the children's emotions. When Lily laughed, the nearest pumpkin smiled widely in response. To the left stood the entrance arch to the labyrinth, created from intertwined branches, leaves, and magical lights. It looked mysterious and beckoning, inviting them to explore its secrets. A soft glow and quiet sounds came from within, the singing of fairies, the whisper of the wind, distant music. To the right was the Quidditch zone. Small broomsticks levitated above the ground, awaiting their riders. Magical hoops hung in the air, glowing with different colors. Golden snitches fluttered around, waiting to be caught. In the center of the clearing stood a large table covered with a white tablecloth. Dishes were arranged on it, pumpkin pies glowing from within, magical sweets of all shapes and colors, glasses of hot, steaming butterbeer in the cold air. But the most impressive was the sky. A magical dome stretched over the clearing, an enchanted sky that showed not ordinary stars, but an entire cosmic show. Shooting stars streaked across the sky every few seconds. The northern lights danced in green and purple waves. Even the moon seemed closer and brighter than usual. And there were ghosts too. Not scary but cute and friendly, they floated in the air, smiling and waving to the children. One of them looked like a small puppy with wings, another like a fluffy cloud with a face. Theatrical fairies, bought from the magical creatures shop, fluttered between the candles, leaving golden trails behind them. Magical butterflies changed colors, creating a kaleidoscope of hues. The cute bats Harry created flew in circles, their large eyes shining in the candlelight. One of them flew up to Lily and quietly squeaked a greeting. "Dad, Mum, look," she whispered, as loudly as a child could whisper. It's like Hogwarts," James whispered, his voice trembling. "Like the great hall you told us about, Dad." Harry knelt beside his son, putting his arm around his shoulders. "We wanted you and your brother, sister, and cousins to feel the same magic that your mother and I felt at Hogwarts, the same beauty, the same wonder." James turned and hugged his father so tightly that Harry almost lost his balance. "This is the best thing that has ever happened to me," the boy whispered, and Harry felt his shoulder become wet with a child's tears of joy. Rose ran up to Hermione, her face shining. "Mum, did you come up with all this? Is all this from the books you read?" Hermione hugged her daughter. "We created it all together, my love. Me, your dad, Uncle Harry, Aunt Ginny, Grandma, Grandpa, Uncle George. It's a whole family effort." Albus spun in place, trying to see everything at once. His dragon wings fluttered, as if he were actually about to fly. "There's a labyrinth, and broomsticks, and ghosts, and fairies," and he couldn't finish the sentence, too overwhelmed by everything he saw. Lily ran up to the nearest pumpkin and carefully touched it. The pumpkin smiled back at her, and the little girl laughed, a pure, clear laugh that spread across the entire clearing. Hugo stood in the middle of it all, slowly turning, his little wizard hat slightly askew. He looked at the floating candles with such an expression of awe that Ron walked over and picked up his son so he could see better. "Dad," Hugo whispered, "is this real magic?" Ron smiled, his eyes gleaming. "Yes, son, the most real magic." The children gradually began to recover from the initial shock. James was the first to move towards the Quidditch zone, his legs instinctively carrying him there. Albus ran after him, his dragon tail dragging on the grass. Can we fly?" James shouted, turning to his parents, his voice trembling with impatience. Ginny laughed, her face shining. "Of course, that's what it's all for." Rose, true to her nature, headed for the labyrinth. She stood before the entrance arch, studying it with scientific curiosity, her fingers touching the intertwined branches. "Is it safe?" she asked Hermione, looking over her shoulder. "Absolutely," her mother assured her, walking closer. "We've placed every protective charm possible. There are only riddles and beautiful magical effects. Nothing scary." Rose nodded, her eyes shining with excitement, and took the first step under the arch, disappearing into the soft glow of the fog. Lily and Hugo ran towards the area with the magical creatures. The fairies immediately noticed them and flew to meet them, circling around the little children and leaving golden trails in the air. The children laughed, stretching out their hands, trying to touch the fairies, but they always slipped away at the last moment, playing a magical game of tag. One of the cute bats Harry created flew up to Lily, its large eyes shining in the candlelight. The little girl froze, her eyes wide, then cautiously held out her hand. The bat landed on her palm, and Lily quietly gasped with delight. "Dad, Mum, look!" she whispered as loudly as a child could whisper. The adults stood a little apart, watching the children. On the faces of Harry, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, Molly and Arthur were smiles. Not just smiles, but a genuine radiance of happiness coming from the depths of their souls. "We did it," Ginny said quietly, tightly squeezing Harry's hand. "We really did it." Harry watched James, who was approaching the first broomstick, his small hands reaching for it with such enthusiasm that Harry's heart overflowed with love. "Yes," he whispered, feeling his throat tighten with emotion. "And this is the best thing we have ever done." Hermione hugged Ron, resting her head on his shoulder, her eyes fixed on Rose, who had disappeared into the labyrinth. Look at them, just look, Ron. Ron looked at his children, Rose bravely stepping into the unknown, Hugo laughing and playing with the fairies, and his own eyes welled up with tears. This is all I ever wanted, he said hoarsely, to see them so happy, so carefree. Molly walked up to all of them, her face wet with tears of joy, but her smile never faded. My dear children, she said, hugging Harry and Ginny, then Ron and Hermione in turn. You have created something incredible. This is not just a holiday. It's a memory they will carry with them throughout their lives, a memory that will warm their hearts, even when they are grown. Arthur stood nearby, his hand resting warmly on Molly's shoulder, and unshed tears glistened in his eyes. I am proud of you all, he said, his voice full of deep emotion. You took love and friendship and turned them into real, tangible magic, something that can be seen, touched, felt. James's little voice broke through the emotion. He had mounted the broomstick, and it gently lifted into the air, obeying his will. The boy laughed with joy, and the sound echoed across the entire clearing. Albus stood nearby, his small hands also reaching for the broomstick, his eyes burning with impatience. He looked back at his parents, as if seeking reassurance. Go on, son. Harry nodded, his voice warm and encouraging. You can do it. Lily danced among the fairies that fluttered around her, leaving golden trails. Her laughter, clear and pure, mixed with the quiet melodies sung by the fireflies. Hugo ran after the magical butterflies, his little wizard hat constantly slipping, but it didn't bother him at all. His face shone with happiness. And from the labyrinth came Rose's voice. She was solving another riddle, and even from afar, the excitement in her tone was audible. Harry watched all this, and felt time slow down. This moment, right now, right here, was perfect. The children were happy, friends were near, family was together. Magic was in the air. He looked at Ginny, at Ron, at Hermione, at Molly and Arthur standing embraced, at George, who was smiling, watching the children. They were all here. All together, and ahead lay an entire evening filled with magic, laughter, and love. The sun touched the horizon with its last ray, and day turned into evening. The floating candles shone even brighter, like thousands of tiny stars that had descended from the sky. The magical dome over the clearing bloomed in all its glory, a starry sky with shooting stars, the northern lights, and a moon that seemed so close one wanted to reach out and touch it. The pumpkins smiled with their carved faces, the fairies danced their eternal dance, the bats circled cute and friendly. The labyrinth glowed from within with a soft light, promising secrets and riddles. The Quidditch zone awaited its little pilots, the hoops twinkling with different colors. And in the middle of it all, 5 children. 5 little wizards, each in their own costume, each with eyes wide with wonder. They explored, laughed, played, feeling the magic not only around them, but also deep within their hearts. This is just the beginning, Ginny whispered, tightly squeezing Harry's hand. Yes, he agreed, smiling. There's still the whole evening program ahead. The labyrinth together, Quidditch games, the feast, the magical show. Hermione walked up to them, holding her notebook, although it wasn't needed now. Everything was happening naturally, organically, exactly as they had dreamed. Are the children ready for the next thing? She asked quietly. Harry looked at the children, at James, who was almost airborne on his broomstick, at Rose, who was emerging from the labyrinth with shining eyes, at Albus, Lily, and Hugo, who were playing with the magical creatures. They're ready for anything, he said with conviction. They were born for magic. Ron walked over, putting his arms around all their shoulders. So, shall we start the real celebration? Let's, they replied in unison. And the clearing came alive around them. Magic pulsed in the air, palpable and alive. The children laughed, their laughter ringing like music. The floating candles danced their eternal dance. Stars fell from the magical sky. And above it all, above the clearing filled with light and love, above the children discovering the true magic of Halloween, hung the sky, both real and enchanted, promising that this evening would be unforgettable. Night had fully taken hold over the clearing. and the magic bloomed in full force. The floating candles pulsed with a soft golden light. The magical sky shimmered with all shades of darkness, and against this backdrop the stars looked especially bright. Harry walked towards the center of the clearing and raised his hand, attracting the children's attention. The 5 little wizards turned to him, their faces glowing in the candlelight. "Children, now we will go into the magical labyrinth together. Riddles and stories await us there." "Ready?" "Yes," the children shouted in unison. Ron walked up to Harry, smiling broadly. "I'll be your guide on this adventure, but be warned, the labyrinth is full of surprises." Hermione joined them, holding a small lantern that glowed with a soft blue light. "And I'll tell you about the true history of Halloween. About how wizards celebrated this holiday hundreds of years ago." The children huddled together. James led the way, his Auror hero cloak billowing behind him. Albus held his brother's hand, his dragon wings slightly fluttering. Rose walked beside her mother. Lily and Hugo brought up the rear, holding hands tightly. Ginny, Molly, Arthur, and George remained at the entrance, watching the small procession disappear into the soft glow of the magical fog. Inside the labyrinth, the air was warm and smelled of cinnamon and apples. The walls of intertwined branches glowed from within with a soft greenish light. A golden inscription appeared on the wall before them. "Welcome, little explorers, to a world of riddles and amazing discoveries. The strongest magic is friendship, wisdom, and courage." The corridor led them further, and they found themselves in the first room, the room of mirrors. Each mirror showed different reflections. In one, James looked like a real Auror, tall and serious. In another, like a tiny gnome with a huge beard. The children laughed. "And this mirror is special," Harry said, pointing to a large mirror in the depths of the room. "It shows who you can become if you work on yourselves." James walked up and saw himself as an adult, in an Auror's robes, with a wand in his hand. His eyes widened. "Will I really become an Auror?" Harry put a hand on his son's shoulder. "If you want to, and work for it, you will. The mirror shows possibilities, but the choice is always yours." Albus saw himself as an explorer, surrounded by books and magical artifacts. Rose, in a teacher's robes. Lily, dancing on a stage. Hugo, a master of magical mechanisms. "Remember," Hermione said, "these mirrors show not destiny, but potential. You create your own future." The next room surprised them even more. A book, glowing from within, levitated in the center. "This is the Book of Halloween Stories," Hermione explained. "It records real events of the past." The book opened, and moving pictures appeared on its pages. "Many centuries ago," Hermione began, "wizards celebrated Halloween as the night when magic became strongest. They lit magical fires to protect their homes." A picture appeared on the pages. Ancient wizards around a large bonfire, their wands raised to the sky. They created amulets from autumn leaves that brought good luck for the entire coming year. The children watched, mesmerized. Even James couldn't take his eyes off the book. "And also," Ron added, lowering his voice, "they believed that on this night one could see the light of memories of those we have lost. Not ghosts, but warm memories." Harry felt a tightening in his chest. He thought of his parents, of Sirius, of Lupin, and he realized that the light of the ancestors' spell was meant for this very moment. "Children, now we will show you something special, a very old spell." He and Ron walked into the center of the room, raising their wands. Harry closed his eyes and remembered. His father, his mother, Sirius. He felt warmth in his chest. A golden spark shot from the tip of his wand, turning into a firefly. Ron also created fireflies. They flew out in silvery streams. Soon the room was filled with hundreds of tiny fireflies dancing in the air. Their light was soft, warm, and soothing. "Every firefly," Harry said quietly, "is a memory. A reminder of those who were important to us." Lily stretched out her hand, and one of the fireflies landed on her palm. It was warm, like a small living star. "It's so beautiful," she whispered. Albus walked up to his father. "Dad, were you thinking of my grandpa James?" Harry knelt down. "Yes, and many other good people I knew. Rose walked up to Ron. And who were you thinking of? Ron paused for a moment. Your Uncle Fred. My twin brother. He was the funniest, bravest person I knew. The fireflies slowly began to disappear, but the warmth remained. Let's go further, Harry said. Many more wonders await us. The next room was filled with fairies and magical creatures. Small pixies circled the children. A friendly brownie sat in the corner, performing magic tricks. The children laughed, playing with the creatures. James tried to catch the fastest fairy. Albus talked to the brownie, asking many questions. Rose recorded observations in an imaginary notebook. Lily and Hugo danced. See, Ron said to Harry quietly. These are the moments that matter most. Children's laughter, discovery, happiness. Harry nodded. Yes, that's what I always wanted to give them. The chance to simply be children. Suddenly, the brownie sneezed, and its magic shot out in all directions. A pumpkin in the corner suddenly came to life and began singing a cheerful song about autumn. The children flinched at first, then burst into laughter. Sorry, the brownie squeaked. I didn't mean to. But the pumpkin kept singing, and the children picked up the tune. Autumn has come, the leaves have fallen, a sea of pumpkins it has brought. Halloween knocks at the door, magic burns until morning. The adults joined in, and soon the whole room was singing together. It was a moment of pure joy. They passed through a few more rooms, with magical puzzles, with echoes where every word was repeated 10 times, with a transparent ceiling where it seemed as if they were standing under space. Finally, they emerged from the labyrinth, and the clearing unfolded before them again, even more magical in the full darkness. Ginny was waiting near the Quidditch zone. Ready for the best Quidditch games? The children shouted with joy and ran to the broomsticks. Ginny gathered them together. The first game is Catch the Stars. See these golden stars? Your task is to catch as many as possible while flying on a broomstick. The stars are tricky and fast. The children enthusiastically mounted their broomsticks. James was the most experienced. Albus, more cautious. Rose took a strategic approach. Lily and Hugo flew at the lowest height. On your marks, get set, go! Ginny commanded. Ron became the improvised commentator. And they fly. James Potter takes the lead. Oh, but Rose Granger Weasley is choosing an interesting strategy. Albus is catching up to his brother. And little Lily and Hugo are just having fun. The children laughed, catching the stars. Each caught star scattered into golden dust. James caught 5, Rose 4, Albus 3, Lily and Hugo 2 each, but their faces shone equally. Time's up, Ginny announced. James is the winner. But you are all incredible. The next game is Flight Through the Hoops. Each hoop gives a different effect. Red, sparks, blue, snowflakes, green, leaves, yellow, flowers. Ready, the children flew again. James flew through the red and was showered with golden sparks. Albus chose blue. Snowflakes swirled around him. Rose, green, a whirlwind of autumn leaves. Lily and Hugo, yellow, thousands of magical flowers. Ron commented, look at this beauty. James Potter looks like a firework. Albus, the Winter King. Rose is dancing with the leaves. And Lily and Hugo, a flying garden. The last game was Quidditch bowling. The children knocked down magical pins with a ball while sitting on their broomsticks. The pins sang funny songs when they fell. James knocked down 3 pins, and they sang, we fell, we lie on the ground, but tomorrow we'll get up and run around. The children roared with laughter. Albus hit 1 pin, which sang a solo aria. When the games were over, the children were tired but happy. Time for the feast, Molly announced. The table was laden with food. In the center stood a huge pumpkin pie that glowed from within. Around it, magical sweets, ghost-shaped cookies, chocolate frogs. There were glasses of hot butterbeer. The children sat at the table, the adults joined them. The floating candles descended lower, illuminating the table with soft light. Let's start with a toast, Arthur said. To our children, to their happiness and wonderful future. To the children, everyone replied. The table filled with cheerful chatter. The children shared their impressions, interrupting each other. Did you see me catch 5 stars? Did you see the mirror, where I was a professor? And remember that pumpkin that sang? And the fairies were so beautiful. And Dad's fireflies were like little stars. Harry sat between Ginny and Ron, looking at the children. He recalled that first Halloween at Hogwarts, when he was 11. He remembered running with Ron to save Hermione from the troll. How their friendship began that day. And now, 24 years later, they were here. Not as children fighting for survival, but as parents giving happiness to their own children. Ginny, as if sensing his thoughts, took his hand under the table and squeezed it. He looked back at her, and they exchanged glances. When the feast ended, George stood up. "All right, little wizards, time for the grand finale show. Uncle George and Uncle Ron have prepared something special." He and Ron walked to the edge of the clearing, where the magical fireworks were set up. These fireworks create not just lights, but real magical pictures. Watch! The first firework exploded, and a huge dragon of fire appeared in the sky. It flew, flapping its wings, its eyes shining. The children watched mesmerized. The second created a phoenix, a golden bird that flew higher and higher. At the highest point, it exploded into thousands of golden sparks. The third turned into a unicorn, silvery, running across the sky. "Look!" Lily cried. "It's my favorite." The fourth created a castle, resembling Hogwarts, with towers and flags. The fifth exploded above the center of the clearing, creating a huge inscription, "Happy Halloween." The children clapped their hands. The last firework blossomed like a giant flower, with thousands of multicolored petals. Fireflies, just like those in the labyrinth, rained down from its center. The fireflies descended onto the clearing, dancing around everyone. The children danced with them, spinning, laughing. James raised his hands to the sky, Albus held out his palms, and the fireflies created a crown of light. Rose spun around. Lily and Hugo held hands. Music appeared by itself. The magic of the clearing produced a melody. Quiet, calm, filled with warmth. Gradually, the children began to tire. Lily yawned, leaning against Ginny. Hugo rubbed his eyes. Even James was slowing down. "Come, darlings," Molly said. "Time to rest." She conjured soft blankets and pillows, laying them out around a magical bonfire. The fire burned with all the colors of the rainbow, but it didn't sting. It just gave warmth. The children lay down on the blankets. The floating candles descended even lower, forming a soft circle of light. "Dad," James whispered, half asleep, "this was the best Halloween." Harry knelt beside him, stroking his son's head. "I'm glad, son." "Will we do it again?" Albus asked sleepily. "Maybe, but every holiday is special in its own way." Rose was still awake. "Uncle Harry, why did you do all this?" Harry was silent for a moment. "Because you are our future, Rose. We want it to be filled with happiness and magic." Rose nodded, closing her eyes. "Thank you." Lily and Hugo were already asleep, holding hands tightly. The adults quietly moved away and sat around the fire a little further away. Molly broke the silence. "Thank you, my children, for this evening." Arthur put his hand on her shoulder. "You created something real, a memory they will carry through life." George wiped his eyes. "Fred would have..." His voice broke. Harry put a hand on his shoulder. "He is here, George. In every smile, in every laugh." George nodded. Ron spoke. "This was the best Halloween, not because of the spectacle, but because I saw my children truly happy." Hermione took his hand. "We created not just a celebration. We created a memory that will warm them in difficult times." Ginny looked at the sleeping children. "They will tell their own children about this Halloween." Harry stood up, walking a little away from the fire. He looked at everything: the floating candles, the labyrinth, the Quidditch zone, the magical sky. But most of all, at the sleeping children, at James with his wand clutched, at Albus with his plush dragon, at Rose with a smile, at Lily with her fairy wings, at little Hugo. Ginny walked up, hugging him from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Harry was silent for a few seconds. "About how lucky I am. I had a difficult childhood. I always dreamed of a family, of a place of my own." He turned around. "And now my dream has come true. I have you. 3 children, best friends, family." Ginny hugged him. "I'm happy too. We've created something special, every day." Ron and Hermione walked up, and all 4 embraced. "Remember," Hermione said quietly, "when we were 11, and all we dreamed of was surviving the next day." "And now," Ron added, "we dream of how to make our children happy." "It's the best transformation," Harry said, "from war to peace, from fear to life." The magical bonfire crackled softly. The floating candles went out one by one. Even the magical sky began to fade. Harry knelt beside the children. Ginny sat down beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. They sat like that, watching the children, as the night slowly turned into morning. Dawn broke over the clearing. The first rays of sun touched the tops of the trees. The children stirred in their sleep but did not wake up. Even in their dreams, there were smiles on their faces. Harry looked at the fading sky. He thought of the dark times, of the war, of the losses, of Voldemort, of the battle, but also of the bright moments, of the first meeting with Ron, of the friendship with Hermione, of Ginny, of the birth of his children, of all those little joys. And he realized something important. Life is not about how many times you fall. It's about how many times you get up, how much light you bring into the darkness. "Harry," Hermione called, and he turned around. She stood by the fire with the others. Everyone was looking at him. "Come, let's sit together a little longer." Harry walked over. They sat in a circle, holding hands. "To this night," Arthur said quietly. "To being here, together." "To us," they replied. And at that moment, as the sunrise illuminated the clearing, as the children slept under the magical sky, Harry felt peace. He was home, surrounded by those he loved. The real magic, it's these moments, when you are surrounded by those who matter. When your children laugh, when your friends are near. And this Halloween, on the 31st of October 2014, in a small clearing near the Burrow, 5 children received something they will remember forever. Not because it was expensive or spectacular, but because their parents created something real for them, something born of the desire to give joy. And the 5 children will carry this memory throughout their lives. And when they grow up and have their own children, they will tell them about that special night. About the best Halloween. About how magic can be not only in spells but also in simple things. And this story will live on, passed down from generation to generation. Because the best stories are those born of the simple desire to make those you love happy.